Apple released some very unique desktop Macs that became collector's items over the last few decades. MacBooks have only been around for 18 years though, so what are the most memorable of the MacBooks? Unique designs, meaningful releases, the ones any collector should be on the lookout for. I'm going to give each of these MacBooks a collector's rating out of 10. This is defined by how great they were at release, how usable they are now, and how rare they are at the moment. First up, the 17-inch unibody MacBook Pro. These were made from 2009 to 2011. They were by no means a hugely successful project for Apple. In fact, they were the first unibody MacBook Pros Apple discontinued, thanks to dwindling sales and a pretty unreliable history of graphics card failure. Their 17-inch displays had resolutions of 1920 by 1200, which was spellbinding for 2009 and even looks good today. Apple has never made another laptop of this size, so they're the cream of the crop for large screen lovers. 2010 and 2011 17 inches were known to both have significant graphics problems, with the 2011s almost all failing eventually, mainly due to poor internal build quality, which paired with a hot computer under load was a lethal combination. A big reason these are so collectible is because of that gorgeous screen. They're also somewhat usable in 2024 thanks to Intel processors, of which the 2011 has a quad-core i7. Let's give the unibody 17-inch MacBooks a collector's rating of 6. They might still get the job done for you when it comes to spreadsheet and document work, as well as web browsing. Viewing any video or games has always been great on these things, and people who work in creative industries used to swear by them. They have gone up significantly in price since the 2020s began though. I haven't been able to find one under £100 or $125, even damaged or faulty. Next, the 2006 to 2008 black polycarbonate MacBooks. These were sold alongside the white ones, but were only on the market for 2 years new. They were among the first MacBooks to be sold and came with 2-core Intel Core Duo processors. The plastic MacBooks were marketed as computers for office and school use especially, with their slightly weaker performance. No black polycarbonate MacBook ever had dedicated graphics, for example, and their cheaper plastic casings gave off an air of cheapness compared to the aluminium Apple has started building their laptop cases out of. These days, the MacBook Air comes in a colour pretty close to this, known as Midnight. Without a glowing Apple logo, though, it's not quite the same deal. It's just one of a kind, I suppose, and they're getting rarer. Not many of these can be found without pieces missing or cracked cases. Buying one of these to use every day probably isn't a good idea right now, but with an SSD upgrade they can navigate macOS fairly competently. Let's give these a collector's rating of 8. Their short-lived sales period, as well as the fact that a lot of these are getting on for 18 years old, are both reasons to consider them pretty rare machines. Next, a very specific model. The 2008 MacBook Air 1,1 with the 64GB SSD configuration. The 2008 release of Apple's MacBook Air was the first instance of Apple offering an SSD in a laptop as a configuration at purchase. Not many people bought that version though, as it came with an initial cost of $999, on top of the price that already started at $1,799. Some people tried to upgrade the 80GB spinning hard drive to get an SSD in their first generation Airs, but the original Samsung-made SSD-cladded MacBooks that were configured at purchase are notoriously hard to find now. The original MacBook Airs are far from desirable machines at face value. Their processors are weak, graphics performance near non-existent, repairability factor pretty near zero. There's an unrelenting charm about these though. Steve Jobs announcing the MacBook Air in 2008 was a big moment for Apple, and you're buying yourself a piece of that moment in the SSD-equipped MacBook Air 1,1. I'm going to give these an 8 out of 10 for collector's score, mainly because of their rarity. This collector's MacBook is a favourite of mine, the MacBook Pro 2012 15-inch unibody, specifically the 2.7 GHz build-to-order model, with the high-resolution anti-glare display fitted. The 2012 unibody 15-inch MacBook has gone down in history as one of the most well-loved of all time. Some saw this thing as the last great MacBook. Me personally, well, these things were brilliant when released, with 4-core i7s and very strong graphics processors for the time. An incredible upgrade path with space for 2 storage drives as well as much as 16GB of RAM, and of course that higher resolution 1680 by 1050 display gives this thing a real collector's appeal as a Mac that can still be used every day in my eyes. I had one of these from 2021 to 2022, fully decked out with all those parts, as well as an upgraded Wi-Fi card for faster connections and Apple Watch unlocking. I'd even put thermally conductive pads on the internal heatsinks, which drop temperatures by a couple of degrees. I unfortunately had to sell it once I upgraded to a 2019 16-inch. I just don't really have the money to be collecting MacBooks right now. The build-to-order unibody 2012s are possibly the greatest examples of upgradability and repairability in a MacBook. If everyone were able to use machines like this right now, we'd have far fewer dead MacBooks binned every day. The 14-year-old parts just don't quite cut it these days. Editing my videos wasn't doable, and that's no crazy feat. Because of how fun they are to upgrade, as well as how important their legacy has been, I'm going to give these a 6 out of 10 collector's rating. Are they rare? Well, not exactly, but it's not super often you see a 2.7 GHz matte display model. Next on the list, the 2015 to 2017 12-inch MacBook line. These were the smallest MacBooks ever made, and it's still unbelievable when you feel how thin these are in person. Apple managed to cram a low-power Intel chipset into the tiny chassis, which unfortunately was well known to be quite weak. 512GB of storage and 16GB of RAM was the highest specification released, with a dual-core i7 on the 2017s. These are not always fondly remembered, but they are still interesting to some. Apple hasn't continued the plain old MacBook line in 7 years now, and to be honest, a reboot isn't looking likely. Pretty high quality screens, as well as great speakers and official macOS support up to macOS Ventura make these pretty usable in 2024. If you work in video editing or anything 3D really, I wouldn't recommend buying one, but for word processing and that sort of thing, absolutely fine. I feel like these have always been a bit overpriced for what you get, but right now their prices are fairly low. Let's give these a collector's rating of 6.5 out of 10. They haven't exactly had a lasting legacy, but if you think about it, the same design of the 2015 12-inch was used in the MacBook Pro of 2016 and onwards, and is still being used in the MacBook Air 2020, which has only just stopped being sold new by Apple. Oh, also, which MacBook do you use at the moment? I'm interested to know, so I started a What's on Your Screen Discord where we can talk about old Macs and all the sort of stuff my channel covers. Join using the link in the description. Right, that's about all for today. Subscribe for more of the same, and if you wish to support my channel financially, my Patreon is linked below with tiers starting from $2.99. You can see videos early, get Discord perks, and your name dropped in every video outro as a thanks. See you next week.